Look, when Hall of Famers start talking, I'm all ears. I mean, these guys have done it at the highest level, so even if I don't agree with everything they say, I'm at least listening to see if it makes sense. But man, Emmitt Smith was all over the place during Super Bowl week, and what he said about George Pickens has got me scratching my head. I need to talk about this because honestly, I think a lot of people are getting this whole situation twisted. What's up, Cowboys? Welcome to the NFL Playbook Cowboys. If you're new here, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. This channel is all about breaking down everything you need to know about the America's team. So yeah, Emmitt Smith was everywhere during Super Bowl week. I mean, every show had him on, and he was really chatty out there. He was also selling this portable Wi-Fi box or something, and I'm telling you, he advertised that thing everywhere he went. But I digress. What really caught my attention was what he said about George Pickens. He basically said, we don't know if George Pickens is a true #1 receiver. And look, I respect Emmett, but I'm struggling with this one. I'm really struggling with this take. Let me just put this out there, Cowboys fans. George Pickens was a legit #1 receiver before he even got here. He was the #1 guy in Pittsburgh. Yeah, he didn't put up the numbers he's putting up now with Dak Prescott, but that's because of context. I mean, anybody who watched Pickens in Pittsburgh knew he could do way more than what he was doing there. Think about the quarterbacks he had, guys. Mason Rudolph, Kenny Pickett, Russell Wilson, who's no longer in his prime. I mean, come on. Sometimes people just don't use context to understand what was truly going on with a player. When George Pickens came to Dallas, he had an incredible season. I'm not even going to bore you with all the stats because you already know he balled out. Now, there were about 2 games where things didn't go great for George, but honestly, I don't blame those on him. I blame them more on the scheme and the game plan. And you know what? Even Brian Schottenheimer has taken ownership of that. But it's obvious that a lot of people took those couple of games and they wanted to hold them against George Pickens. That's not fair, man. So, during this conversation with Emmitt Smith, Chad Johnson asked Emmett about George Pickens and whether it's time for him to get paid. Chad was thinking about how valuable George is and what he showed in that small sample size and how great he can be in the right situation. And Emmett said George Pickens is in the right place, that he's in a spot where he can flourish alongside CeeDee Lamb. He compared it to duos like Michael Irvin and Alvin Harper or Jerry Rice and John Taylor. Now look, I think CeeDee Lamb and George Pickens are different animals because George Pickens is truly a #1. I'm not telling you he's the #1 for the Cowboys, but what I am telling you is that Pickens is better than someone like Alvin Harper. I saw both of them play, and I'm telling you, I think Pickens is better than Alvin. Alvin may have had a little bit more speed, I'd have to check the 40 times, but Pickens is a different animal. He's a #1 receiver. He ain't no Robin. He might be more like Nightwing, you know what I mean? He kind of came into his own. Pickens is not a sidekick. He's a legitimate #1 wide receiver. And I'm not saying he's better than CeeDee Lamb. I'm putting some respect on CeeDee Lamb's name. But I'm also telling you Pickens is a different animal than those typical #2 receivers. He is that talented. And I think what we saw this season was just a glimpse of how good he can really become in a system that supports that type of environment. My hope is that Jerry Jones and Pickens get this contractual stuff behind them so we don't have to deal with all these questions during the offseason. The Dallas Cowboys and the fans deserve a quiet, boring offseason for once. When does that ever happen? That's why we deserve one. But then Chad said that based on what George Pickens has done and what he's shown, whatever contract he gets should overlap with CeeDee Lamb's contract. And that's when Emmett pushed back. He said maybe, maybe not. He said, first of all, we don't know if George is a #1. A #1 doesn't quit. A #1 doesn't pout when he doesn't get the ball. A #1 understands that defenses could be doubling up and you might not get a throw. Now hold on, I love Emmitt Smith, but how many times in the last 2 seasons have we seen CeeDee Lamb pout? We saw CeeDee Lamb against the Philadelphia Eagles drop a pass and blame it on Dak Prescott in the second Eagles game. We saw it. We have seen CeeDee Lamb pout over the last couple of seasons. I mean, we've seen a lot of receivers do this. We haven't seen Justin Jefferson or Jamar Chase do it as much. And I know what Emmett is referencing. He's referencing a couple of games that happened this season, but I'm not blaming those on Pickens. A lot of people tried to run to those games and use them to say this is why Jerry shouldn't pay him. That's foolishness. Emmett went on to say that a #1 says, okay, I'm going to draw double coverage. You better tear that one-on-one up by yourself. A #1 says, look at the defense and ask, how can we run the ball? A #1 understands they might be playing defensive back even though that's not what you hired them for. And Emmett said a number one would say run the ball when it's 6 in the box or 7 in the box. He even said Michael Irvin told you in cover 2, throw it to me anyway, I'ma go get it. And Michael went and got it. I understand what Emmett is saying, but I know the games he's talking about. And when you think about those games, what were they doing against Pickens? What did Brian Schottenheimer have Pickens doing? He had him running 2 routes, slants and comebacks. For whatever reason, Pickens was so dangerous on the slant that Brian Schottenheimer thought he could run it against anybody and thought teams weren't going to catch on. Well, the Detroit Lions caught on. They had a man underneath, they had a man over the top, and they jumped the comebacks and they jumped the slants. And Pickens was frustrated, not because of how they were playing him. I believe Pickens was frustrated because Brian Schottenheimer wouldn't change up what he was doing. It's that simple, man. We've got to stop this narrative on Pickens. We've got to stop this narrative on George Pickens, because if we keep these kinds of narratives up and George Pickens goes somewhere else, he's going to come back to haunt us. Emmett said that George needs to develop that mentality of going in there against 2 or 3 guys. He said George has to get in a system that affords him the opportunity to showcase he's a number one. He mentioned how Alvin Harper thought he was a number one until he went to Tampa. He said the right system gives you the ability to shine at your best, while the wrong system will hold you back. I'll give Emmett credit on that point as it applies to Alvin Harper, but Pickens was already a number one. And I'm telling you right now, mess around and let him go to a team like the Kansas City Chiefs with Patrick Mahomes. He'll show you. Patrick Mahomes, Andy Reid, and Brett Veach will show you that Pickens is a true number one. I don't like this conversation that swirls around George Pickens. It's like people try to degrade and denigrate him so that he's not better than CeeDee Lamb. Who cares about that? I'm just glad we've got 2 receivers that I can truly say are number one receivers. How about that? How about it doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things which one of them is better? All I know is that he had a better season than CeeDee Lamb. That's what we know right now. But to say that Pickens has got to get to a certain point, man, receivers are always growing. The receiver that CeeDee Lamb is today won't be the receiver he is 4 years from now. But I don't need to watch another game to understand that George Pickens is a number one, because George Pickens was a number one before he got here.